Hey, this video is going to be a little bit different because I'm using a script which is not like me at all, like a full-on script, paragraphs and everything, and I'm also doing this with different software for each part of it, so it'll be a little bit weird, but I think it's appropriate for the subject matter, and if you want more stuff like this, I mean, it takes a lot of effort, but I'll try. So, let's get into it. So far, as a playtester, I'm quite happy with how FreeJam has been developing Robocraft 2. Even when I do not agree, they usually have very grounded and sensible reasons for the approach they are taking. And they are about as responsive to the community as an indie developer can be without going insane. This video isn't about the things where FreeJam are doing wrong. If anything, my time in the Robocraft 2 community has proven to me that what I'm about to explain does not come naturally to most people. And honestly, the community is often more guilty of it than the developers are. So what's the problem? Robocraft 2 is what you would call a UGC PvP game. UGC stands for User-Generated Content, and PvP stands for Player versus Player. The thing is, most games that let you create anything you want do not have the unique problems Robocraft has. When a player makes whatever they want, it's usually a castle, or an airship, or an obstacle course. The player versus player part is a great deal of what makes Robocraft stand out from these other UGC games, but it's also one of its greatest design challenges. The player now has a goal. Since this is a user-generated content game, they have an unparalleled ability to achieve that goal that very few other games give their players. They can use tools such as powered joints, their own programmed logic, and even use weapons and movement parts in ways you would never expect to achieve an end. The end is beating other players. Quick side tangent. There is somewhat of a belief among Robocraft 2 players, which has migrated mostly from other player versus player games. This belief assumes because people play the game for different reasons, and because in different intensities especially, that the problem is not really with the nature of a game that pits players against other players. The problem must be that there are players who will stop at nothing until their play is optimized, quote, wringing the fun out of the game until there's nothing left to enjoy. I held a survey recently, which at one point asks players how they prefer to play. It only had 35 responders, which is nowhere near thousands of people who are following this game, of course. But many of those players were prominent members in the community. And honestly, in retrospect, what I uncovered makes total sense anyway. Would it surprise you to hear that 77% of those 35 responders said they play Robocraft 2, at least in part, for battles? Granted, there was another answer for metagaming, and it was a lot less popular. But, knowing this, disproving this belief is only a simple case of reasoning. If most players want to battle, then regardless of if they picked the metagaming option, doesn't it make sense that they would have an amount of competitive spirit? If true, then their involvement with wringing the fun out of the game is only a matter of how much they want to compete. Makes sense? Given that many of the highly competitively driven players have fun by, quote, wringing the fun out of the game, I think we can safely start to see what is not fun about being up against a player that is better at the game than you. This isn't an accusation. I'm not perfect at the game, and yeah, fighting people way above your skill bracket isn't fun in anything at all. I realize this is a whole can of worms, and I have likely left many points and opinions about this unscathed. But this isn't the real topic of this video, it's the UGC part, so we're going to have to leave it for another time. The point is, if players have a goal in a user-generated content game, they will achieve it in any way possible. Since PvP games are competitive in nature, this causes some problems. What is the goal of Robocraft 2? Well, the obvious answer is that it's to win. But we can narrow it down further than that, because within winning, you can be fast and have reliable movement. You can have good armor and be hard to kill. You can be fast at completing objectives, also known as destroying plutonium crystals at the moment. You can be exceptionally good at killing other players. These are all things that players will try, and have tried to do. If you approach developing Robocraft 2 like other games, this is essentially a minefield. You will create exploits, it's only a matter of time. Arguably, it's a matter of time no matter what you do, but in light of how the development of Robocraft 2 has been in the past year, there have been a lot of exploits. I think FreeJam needs to change its approach to development, unless that is it wants to spend more time fixing exploits than developing the game. What is the solution? First, I want you to look at the list of things you can do to win the game that I described earlier. Being fast and reliable, being endurant, taking objectives, and killing other players. This isn't exhaustive, there's many other things you could put down on this list, but it's a good start, so let's start with it. Let's say that you notice a problem with the game. It's very easy to flip your Robocraft, and if your Robocraft loses an essential part early, you're basically stuck in the battlefield until you can recall. Once you do recall, you must go all the way from your team's base to the front line. Most of the gameplay is essentially just driving from point A to B. I hope I don't have to explain why that is incredibly lame. You come up with a good solution. Players will have a button which they can only use if they haven't taken damage in a while. When pressed, it will reconstruct their entire Robocraft in front of them, right side up. Ordinarily, this is great design. You've hit two birds with one stone. Chef's kiss. I would usually do something like this if I was trying to make a game. Now let's say that instead of immediately starting work on this fix, you look at the ways players try to build their Robocrafts to win. They try to be fast and reliable. They try to be endurant. They try to be really good at taking objectives. And they try to be really good at killing other players. You remember that you can actually place multiple seats per Robocraft. And from this you remember that if players are coordinated, they could probably have one player with a flyer that has multiple seats. This flyer could then take players to the front line at top speed, and then those players could use their new buttons to reconstruct their entire Robocraft right on the front line, instantly, and if they wanted, they could say that their Robocrafts that they're using to do that are enormous tanks. But wait, hold on, it actually gets worse. Can't you have multiple unconnected groups on your Robocraft? You don't even need one player to play taxi. You could have a dirt cheap flyer that takes you to the front line to drop the most massive, invincible, immovable tower made of the heaviest materials in the game right on the enemy's objectives. Haven't we just created the fastest, most endurant Robocraft in the game? And because the objectives don't move, and this thing doesn't move, taking objectives is really what it's best at? By observing what the player is motivated to build, we have just narrowly averted a crisis. I'm not kidding myself, these things are more obvious in retrospect. And I understand that when you're developing a game, it can be easy to become laser focused on how the game should behave. The caveat is, I don't think it's a coincidence that every time a fix like this is announced, experienced players are often able to discover the exploit for it before they even have their hands on it. The difference must be in how these players perceive the game compared to the developers, rather than any other factor. I know this is true because some players are extremely good at it, even when they aren't interacting with other players. I have seen in servers for small clans just two people talking about how to exploit a new fix that isn't even in the game yet. And then it comes true. That is remarkable odds for two players. So the difference must be in how these players perceive the game compared to the developers, rather than anything else. It has to be. It can't be that the community simply has more minds that work faster than the developers. But I admit, this does sometimes make a difference as well. I've seen that. Anyway, my proposed solution is this. Remember what players are encouraged to do. Remember that no matter what, players will do those things as optimally as they can discover. Remember that they will probably try to do this through less legitimate means before they figure out how to do it without exploiting, because exploiting the game is just really exciting. Every part in the game should have explicit functions. Every option in combat should be no different. We should be treating it as if every worst case scenario is something that a player will probably manage to do eventually, since they have access to the tools to do almost anything. The solution FreeJam ended up coming up with for the example I gave was to make reconstructing your Robocraft take longer the further away each part of your Robocraft is from you, and how heavy those parts actually are. This was a good fix in my opinion, because it looks at what the player is encouraged to do, whether that was intentional or not, and tries to negate any advantage they would get for abusing the feature. It's more that we probably could have come to that conclusion without having to reschedule playtests and halt some parts of development just to get it fixed. And honestly, sometimes I question if how it works now might even be a little bit too complicated. This design philosophy may seem easier said than done, and in a sense, it is, since as a developer, you will always have blind spots. But we have the technology to do it. We have software that allows us to document how we are developing the game and make it easy for an entire studio full of people to access it. The difficult part, I think, really is just a matter of adopting the mindset. Now, I wouldn't want FreeJam to come to this conclusion first, but in the end, I think if adopting a mindset like this proves too difficult, for someone who is developing the game, it would also make sense to have private consultants from the community which have access to new content before other people. I don't know if this would be a great idea, especially since then you're still putting in the time to create features which might be better off being ditched anyway. And honestly, I'm an amateur. I wouldn't take advice for how to run a business from me. I think the best case scenario would be that FreeJam as a whole, majority of its developers, I wouldn't know about all, but majority, especially the big names, who are involved in the balancing of the game. I think the best case scenario would be that they adopt the mindset of somebody who wants to break the game over their knee. I suppose that's all. Have a good day. I'd just like to say, this one got a little bit, it sounded a little bit doomery in points, at least in my opinion. The intent wasn't for me to act like Robocraft 2 as a project is doomed or anything. I mean, these things are difficult to develop. I'm constantly impressed that an indie studio is able to do what they can. I mean, on paper, I don't think any bigger studio would try to do this, and the reason is because it's difficult. But FreeJam is really good at it. They've been doing it for decades at this point. I think more like 1 decade, but that's still a lot of experience. And I think that their team is very, very good at listening to community members and taking the feedback from it, which is actually important. They have not been they haven't been changing their opinions super quickly, trying to like appease the masses or anything. They just listen and then they react appropriately. So they're doing great, and I think if they get access to this video and see it, they'll probably adjust their style of development just enough to avoid these things a bit more in the future. Just understand that I've made this video not because FreeJam doesn't listen, it's actually the other way around. Thank you for bearing with me through that slightly long outro. I just felt like I needed to make that clear. Thanks.